Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have an 8-game slate. We already have one game called today, so it is just an 8-game slate now. That's the Philadelphia-Chicago White Sox game. With that said, I do have some core plays for you on here on DraftKings and FanDuel. So for DraftKings, DeGrom, Wisdom, and Martinez. And then for on FanDuel, I have Albies, Wisdom, Martinez, and Chris Bryant. DeGrom was very close to being a core play as well on FanDuel, but I'll get into him in a minute on both sites here. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? Also, put your home run calls in the comments below. Had several home run calls yesterday. None of them came true, so hopefully we get some today. I do have a core home run play today myself, and that is JD Martinez. And so do keep that in mind. So with that said, let's get into our pitchers. For our pitching, Jacob deGrom is the obvious de facto #1 guy today. While he did start the season with a rough game against Philadelphia, he's recovered and had 2 really solid games in a row now. And last season, he was extremely good once he got going. I don't think he's in a bad position here at all. He's also the best strikeout pitcher on the slate. He is fairly priced up, obviously, at $10,000, but he's definitely worth it on this particular slate. There's enough value around that you can kind of mix him in, especially if you can go with a lower priced pitcher, which are plenty available today. So I do think he's a great option on this slate. As for our other pitchers, we're going to start by looking at Corbin Burnes. And while he has had a rough start to the season, he had 2 bad games. He did recover against Arizona and have a really solid game. He has the second best strikeout rate on this slate, which is behind Burnes. And he's also got the best runs against Vegas total today for Milwaukee against Seattle. So he is viable on the slate. He's not a must play, but he's definitely a good option. And so he's definitely worth taking a look at. If you want to go a little bit cheaper, you can go down to Hayden Wesneski for Chicago. Now, he's got an easy matchup against Oakland, despite the fact he hasn't had very good success to start the season. I do want to point out that last season he had 2 really solid games, 3 really solid starts, and he only started 4 games last year, and 3 of those games he had 19 fantasy points or better. So he is worth taking a look at. He's high risk, high reward. Almost to what you would consider a Hail Mary option at the pitching position, but he's definitely worth taking a look at on this particular slate. Jack Flaherty is also very interesting for St. Louis today. He's got some really nice upside in this matchup. He's high risk, high reward, though, and he really doesn't have that 25 or 30 fantasy point upside in this matchup. But he does have a decent strikeout rate for this particular situation, and Arizona has not. They have been somewhat streaky this season to start. Dustin May is also worth taking a look at for the Dodgers. Now, he has a tough matchup against the Mets, but he has got some upside here, and he has some chance to get a win, and that definitely gives him some upside. He really probably won't get enough strikeouts, though, to be very useful, but he does have some utility here. Max Fried is also interesting at that price point. As a mid-level guy, and he's a good alternative to Burnes or May. He did get hurt in his first start, which limited his totals, but he does have good strikeout stuff most of the time, and he's got a decent matchup here, so I definitely think he's worth taking a look at. He's not a must-play by any stretch of imagination, but he is a viable option. And then as a hardcore alternative to DeGrom, Kevin Gausman, who's in a tough matchup against Houston. He started the season about as consistent as anybody in the pitching staff today, and he's got only 3 earned runs in this season to start. He's also got good strikeout stuff, though he does have the worst matchup on the slate when it comes to our top pitchers, so he's not a must-play, but he's a very good GPP contrarian option away from DeGrom if you want to go that route. Let's go ahead and get into the catchers here. Now we're going to start with Vlad Guerrero Jr. Sorry, not first baseman. Catchers for Sean Murphy for Atlanta. Now, Sean Murphy has some nice upside in this matchup. He's been hitting the ball pretty well recently as well. He's also had a couple home runs a few games ago. He looks like he's in a really solid spot, and Atlanta looks like a really good stack today, though it is going to be somewhat hard to stack a lot of those guys, but you should be able to stack several of them on this one. Wilson Contreras for St. Louis also has some nice upside here. He hasn't hit a home run yet, and he hasn't hit the ball particularly well, but he's had a couple of decent games, and the last game against Pittsburgh, he was really good after taking a day off, so I look for him to have a really solid option on the slate, and he's priced about the same as Murphy. He's a good contrarian option. And if you want to go a little bit cheaper, you can go down to William Contreras from Milwaukee. Now he has home run potential, something he hasn't done to start the season yet, but he is hitting the ball pretty well, despite the fact he hasn't had a whole lot of good fantasy point games. His price is cheap enough worth taking a look. I do want to remind you though that this game looks like it's going to be fairly cold, so do keep that in mind. And then for a Hail Mary option at this position, we're going to look at Elias Diaz for Colorado. He's in a really plus matchup here. Now, he's in a home game for Colorado, which gives him a huge advantage. He's hit the ball a lot better at home than he has on the road, and he has home run potential in this game. He's high risk, high reward. He's a Hail Mary option on the slate. At the first baseman, we're going to look at Vladimir Guerrero Jr. He's very expensive here and won't be easy to roster. And it's not the best matchup he's ever had, but he has some potential in this situation. He's hitting the ball extremely well this season to start, and he looks like another great situation for him. Carlos Santana also looks interesting for Pittsburgh. Now he has kind of almost a boomer bust mentality here, but he's cheap enough that he's worth taking a look at for Pittsburgh, who does have a nice plus matchup here against Colorado. Matt Olson also looks very interesting today for Atlanta. He looks like a really good option if you're going to pay up over $5,000. He's one of the better options on the slate. He's been hitting the ball extremely well, and he also smashed San Diego for 4 really good games earlier already this season, and I look for him to continue that and have home run potential in this matchup. Nathaniel Lowe, for Texas, is a good contrarian option, and he's a little bit cheaper. He's hit the ball fairly good to start the year. He's been getting hits in most games, and so I do think he's got some viability here. He also has home run potential in certain types of matchups, and this is definitely one of them. Ozzy Albies for Atlanta also looks really solid today. While he has been kind of up and down throughout the season so far, he's been very good in certain situations, and this situation just really gives him a lot of upside. He did hit a home run yesterday, so you keep that in mind as well. Rodolfo Castro for Pittsburgh is a good alternative to Albies. He's also cheap and kind of a value play. He's a little bit risky, but he is about the best option on Pittsburgh today, especially in a plus matchup in Colorado. You can also throw him in shortstop if you want. Then we're going to look at our third baseman and look at Austin Riley. He's a really good option on the slate, though. He's fairly expensive. I do like Matt Olson a little bit better from Atlanta, but he does definitely have some upside, and he's been hitting the ball pretty well so far this season. Patrick Wisdom is a guy I really like today for the Chicago Cubs. Sorry, I already have him here at third base. He has some really nice upside here. He's been hitting the ball extremely well lately. He's had 3 straight games with home runs, and I look for him to continue that streak here in a plus matchup against Oakland, who he should be able to dominate. Then we're looking at the shortstops and look at Von Grisham as a top-tier play. He's played pretty solid to start the season. He's only had 3 games so far, but he's gotten hits in all of them. He hasn't had a big game yet, but does have stolen base potential and stuff like that. So I do think he's in a really good spot, and he's got a nice plus matchup here, and he's definitely worth taking a look at. Like I mentioned Castro already, he has the potential to play at shortstop as well, so he's a good alternative to Grisham. Then we're looking at the outfield here and look at JD Martinez, who's my favorite outfielder and my home run call today. He hasn't hit the ball particularly great to start the season, but he has home run potential here, and he's got a really great matchup. The metrics just jump off the charts, and he's a little bit underpriced as well, which gives him a lot of viability here as a top option, and he's got good metrics. For Chris Bryant, he definitely has home run potential in this game. Another game where he's at home, where, Colorado has an advantage there, and he's got a great matchup here against Pittsburgh, who he should be able to dominate as well, though he is fairly expensive. Andrew McCutchen, also an expensive play that I like for Pittsburgh. I don't love Pittsburgh today, but they do have some guys that have good metrics in this situation. I am a little bit worried that they're overvalued, so I probably wouldn't go with a big Pittsburgh stack, but a couple guys do have really good metrics, and he's one of them. Then we're going to get some cheaper options at this position, and Charlie Blackmon at $4,100 for Colorado. He's got some really nice upside in this situation. He does hit the ball better at home than he does on the road, and he definitely has some nice utility in upside here. Corbin Carroll for Arizona looks like a great option here today. He's had 4 home runs so far this season, and he's hit them against some really good pitching. And he has some nice upside here as a result. Um, he has hit home runs off Alcantara and Kershaw. He has he seems to be somewhat matchup proof to start the season. He's just been hitting balls pretty well against good pitchers throughout the season already. So he's also super cheap and gives him some nice value and a plus matchup for him. Then we're going to look at Patrick Wisdom, who can also play at this outfield position. And it might be a good way to get Austin Riley or some others in to put him in the outfield. And his price is pretty cheap, so he's definitely got some nice utility here. And then Trey Mancini is kind of a Hail Mary option here in the outfield today. He can also technically play first base, but he's a very boomer bust candidate. He's a home run potential or bust, but he does have some nice upside in this situation. But again, I don't expect a lot of hits from him, just a home run if he can get one. So that's what I have for DraftKings. Let's move over to FanDuel now and get into that slate here. So for pitching, it's a little bit shorter roster here to choose from, just because of the way pricing is over here. DeGrom is obviously the de facto option. I think he's a very good play on the slate, and he has some nice upside. But I don't think I don't think that necessarily that you have to use him, but I do think he's probably the best option. You could use Corbin Burns, so I don't love him here as much. He does have pretty good upside here on FanDuel because of the strikeouts and the win potential, but he does carry some risk. And then if you want to go super safe or go super cheap and try to kind of do a Hail Mary approach, then you can go with Hayden Wierenski, who hasn't been good so far this season, but he actually did okay in the first game as far as fantasy wise. Almost got 20 fantasy points against Cincinnati, and he actually did pretty good last year and some spot starts. He only started 4 games last year, but he had 3 really good ones. Obviously, he hasn't done that to start this season, but he still really has some upside, so he's worth taking a look at. Vlad Jr. is a great option at catcher first base. He has some really nice upside in this matchup. He's hitting the ball extremely well. He's only had 2 home runs on the season so far, which is also pretty strange, but he definitely has some good upside here, and he is kind of due for another home run. Carlos Santana is a good alternative at first base. He's a little bit cheaper, has some good upside here. He's kind of in a higher risk situation since it's in Colorado, but he definitely has some potential here. Nathaniel Lowe, I really do like him over here for Texas at first base. He's been hitting the ball fairly good. He does have home run potential in this matchup, and he's a viable option. And then Sean Murphy, if you want to throw a catcher in here, he would be the way to go to do it. He has some nice potential here. Atlanta looks like a really solid option, and he's got big-time upside in this matchup. As for second base, we're going to start with Ozzie Albies, who has all sorts of potential today. He looks like a great option. He's also just way too cheap here on FanDuel, and so I definitely think he's a great play on the slate. Rodolfo Castro is almost the same price. Of course, you can also stick Castro in the shortstop position, and he's been hitting the ball pretty solid for a team that's not hitting very well. And he's probably my favorite play from Pittsburgh. If you were going to use anybody, he would be the guy to do it with. Marcus Semien is also pretty solidly cheap here on FanDuel at $3,200. Now, he's been a little bit boomer bust to start the year, but he has some good upside in this matchup, and so I do think he's viable. And then Von Grisham, who for Atlanta is priced the same as Albies. He's obviously not as good as Albies, so he's not as locked in as a must play on FanDuel, but he definitely has some utility in this situation. And third base, we're going to look at Austin Riley first. He has some really good potential in this game. He is a little bit pricey, though, and he's a little bit hard to roster on the slate, but he has nice upside, and he's worth taking a look. Of course, my favorite play for the position today is Wisdom, who's a little bit too cheap for his potential here. He's also hit 3 home runs in 3 straight games, and so he has some nice upside here, but he's high risk, high reward. Max Muncy is a good alternative to those two guys at $3,600. He is a little bit overpriced, and he's kind of a boomer bust potential in this situation, but he does have the upside. And at shortstop, we can put Castro or Grissom from the second base options, and so I do think one of those two guys should be in your lineup just to help you save some money. And the outfield, we're going to look at JD Martinez, who I really like today a lot. He's my home run caller for this slate, and while he hasn't hit the ball great yet this season, he also hasn't had he's only had 1 home run. He has had a couple of triples, which is also nice, and he does tend to see, he doesn't strike out a ton, so that definitely gives him some upside here. Chris Bryant is also a core play today here on FanDuel because of his price just being too cheap for his potential. He's only had one home run on the season, but he's got a nice home game here, and that definitely gives him some upside. Andrew McCutchen, also very interesting today. A little bit overpriced, though, here on FanDuel, but he definitely has some utility here. He's kind of risky, but he's also worth taking a look at. Charlie Blackmon also looks very interesting today here on FanDuel with Colorado being the fact that he's at home and he hits the ball here pretty good, and so I do like his potential here. Also, Corbin Carroll looks like a great play for Arizona as a cheaper alternative here on FanDuel. He's hit the ball pretty solidly. He's also had some good home runs, and he has good metrics against good pitching so far this season, so I really like him as a good option. So, with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.